What is the strongest and most overpowered perk ever made in DBD history? Well, in today's video, we're about to find out. What's going on, guys? Sharpshot here. Hope you guys are having a great day so far. So for today's video, we'll be looking at the strongest perk in DBD history. I saw a DBD Reddit post a few days ago asking the exact same question and thought it would make for a pretty cool video looking at a few of the options. And although there were many perks that were listed in this Reddit post, I narrowed it down to 5 perks. 4 of them being honorable mentions, with obviously 1 being crowned the strongest perk ever. So this definitely is up to debate depending on if you had ever played this or if you're a killer or a survivor main, but this does cover both killers and survivor perks. So yeah, without further ado, let's get right into the video. Coming in at number 5 with our first honorable mention, we have Original Noed. All the way back in 2016 at launch in version 1.0.0, No One Escapes Death actually wasn't even a hex perk because those didn't exist. And at tier 3, once the exit gates were opened, successful attacks triggered the dying state automatically, which is just a weird wording of saying that every survivor was exposed. And on top of this, the cooldown for both successful and missed attacks were 8% shorter, and your base movement speed was increased by 5%. So on top of the fact that this wasn't a hex totem, the only counter that survivors had to this perk was literally just escaping as soon as they could, which is mostly the reason why this perk is at number 5 and isn't any higher, because it did only activate very late in the game. So if the killer wasn't already in a chase or near an exit gate, the survivors would have had no problem just escaping. But if you did get caught in the crossfire to this perk, it was definitely a force to be reckoned with, so this was definitely very difficult to counter. Coming in number 4, our next honorable mention is Original Ruin. In version 1.3.1, when Hex Ruin was released, funny enough, the perk tiers actually affected how many survivors were affected by this perk, with tier 3 being all 4 survivors. But with Ruin, when you were working on a gen, a good skill check regressed the generator by 5%, and a great skill check granted 0% bonus progress on that gen, which basically meant that if you failed a skill check, the gen exploded for 5% regression, and if you made a good skill check, it also exploded for 5% regression. So the only way you could actually keep repairing the generator and not lose progress was to get a tiny great skill check, which was a very formidable perk for beginners and even casual players that only very expert and very advanced players could get used to. The survivors basically had to drop everything they were doing to go out and find that hex and cleanse it, which is also part of the reason it isn't any higher than number 4, because at the end of the day, it did have the counter of being a hex perk, and once you got rid of it, it was gone for the rest of the trial. Coming in number 3, our next honorable mention is Original DS. In version 1.2.1, when Decisive Strike was released, once per trial, when a killer grabs you, a small skill check appears that if you succeed it, you escape from the killer's grasp and the killer's stunned for 5 seconds at tier 3. So this was pretty insane back in the day because it didn't have the hook criteria that it does now, and there were no conspicuous actions to deactivate it. So whenever the killer grabbed you, regardless of what you were doing or where you were in the trial, you had a chance to activate DS. And if you didn't want to activate DS in that specific grab, you could just let the skill check go and then save that escape for a later grab. But something that was different with this DS animation than it is with the current one is that it happened a few seconds after the killer grabbed you. So this was very painstaking, but the killer could juggle you and keep picking you up and then dropping you and moving a few meters forward until they got to a hook, in which that case that wouldn't allow DS the chance to activate at all. So although it was super strong, there was a slightly annoying counter to it, which is why it isn't any higher than number 3. Coming in at number 2, our next honorable mention is Original Medal of Man. In version 2.6.3, when Medal of Man released, after you got hit 3 times by a killer's basic attack, the next time the killer hits you while you were injured, that hit that was supposed to put you in a dying state just gets canceled out. And the next time you were healed back up to the healthy state at tier 3, if the killer was further than 16 meters away from you, they were able to see your aura all the way up until you were then put into the dying state again, and which this perk is deactivated for the rest of the trial. So this perk perk was absolutely crazy just for the fact that the 3 hits that you needed to actually activate Metal of Man came from basic attacks and not protection hits, which made it so that it was inevitable, and no matter what, if you were running this perk, you were always going to get value out of it. So there really wasn't any counter from the killer's point of view unless you were hitting the survivors with special attacks, which some killers like Trapper, for example, just couldn't do. So unless you were a killer like Billy that had their chainsaw as a special attack, you were kind of out of luck and were forced to activate Metal of Man. But the reason this perk isn't any higher than 2 is because it did only activate once per trial. So once you saw that they activated Metal of Man, you were good for the rest of the trial. Finally, coming in at number 1 with the most overpowered perk ever made in DBD history, we have Original Sprint Burst. All the way back at launch in 2016, version 1.0.0, with Sprint Burst, when you started to run, you broke into a sprint of 150% of your running speed for 3 seconds. And at tier 3, it took a recuperation of 20 seconds before you're able to rerun and get that Sprint Burst. So this perk was absolutely insane just for the fact that this recuperation was just a fancy word for a 20-second cooldown, that no matter what you were doing, you would get back at 20 seconds. So this meant that you're really easily able to use Sprint Burst multiple times in a chase, and if you just kept running from loop to loop, every 20 seconds you're able to get a massive Sprint Burst and gain a ton of distance on the killers, which made you super difficult to catch. Seeing as this wasn't even an exhaustion perk because the exhaustion status effect didn't even exist back then, I also want to give some quick honorable mentions to the 1.3.0 version of Balanced Landing, and then also the original Dead Hard, which was released in 1.6.0. These have to get mentioned really quickly because they were definitely stronger than all of the honorable mentions in this video. With Balanced Landing, the description is getting put up on the screen right now, but the exhaustion status effect didn't exist up until 1.5.0. Similar to Sprint Burst, you were able to get this every 40 seconds no matter what you were doing. And for Dead Hard, the description will be on the screen right now, but seeing that this perk was released after the exhaustion status effect was created, you would think it wouldn't have been as good, but with the exhaustion status effect, up until patch 2.1.0, you're actually able to recover your exhaustion while you were sprinting, albeit at a 50% penalty, so you just recovered it slower, but you still were able to recover, which meant that you're still able to use Dead Hard multiple times in a chase if it was a really long one. But at the end of the day, I don't think that these perks were actually stronger than original Sprint Burst, just for the fact that Sprint Burst had no extra criteria, whereas Balanced Landing, you had to fall from high ground to activate it, and Dead Hard, you had to actually be injured. So with Sprint Burst, you didn't have any of that. Once you ran, you could use it anytime, anywhere, which is absolutely crazy. So yeah, guys, that was taking a look at the most OP perks in DBD history. Comment down below what you guys think is the strongest perk in DBD history. I definitely think it's Sprint Burst, but there's so many others out there that were absolutely busted. So yeah, guys, that's been the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you're new. This has been Sharpshot, and I will see you guys in the next video.